course, it'll go on as usual, but often we do a little brief devotion over here for 20 or 30 minutes or so. Most of the people that attend that, I think, are serving tonight in Center Shot, so we won't be having that devotion tonight over here. And then, of course, we won't have one on that closing night either, with the parents against the kids and the cookout and things like that. So just wanted to remind you of that. I don't know if you're familiar of who Francis Schaeffer is. He is a theologian. He wrote a many number of books. But in 1970, he wrote a book titled The Mark. In it, he said, through the centuries, men have displayed many different symbols to show that they are Christians. They have worn marks in the lapels of their coats. They have hung chains about their necks, even had special haircuts. But there is a much better sign. It's a universal mark that is to last through all the ages of the church till Jesus comes back. What is this mark? At the close of his ministry, Jesus looks forward to his death on the cross, the open tomb, and the ascension. Knowing that he is about to leave, Jesus prepares his disciples for what is to come. It is here that he makes clear what will be the distinguishing mark of Christians. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I have told the Jews, so I tell you now. Where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. So do you want a distinguishing mark for a Christian? You don't have to go up and draw an ichthus, at least right now in this day and time. You don't have to draw half of an ichthus in the sand or leave some kind of mark like that in anticipation of somebody else responding in like manner and telling you that they are of like faith. Jesus gives us a command. He gives us instruction. What is the distinguishing mark? We don't have to have our heads shaved like a monk. We don't have to cover our hair. Jesus says, love one another. Now, if I wanted to have looked up how many times it says love one another, it says it a bunch in the Bible. I've done that before. I might have even shared those verses with you before as well. But you can go home and you can look it up yourself. Love one another. Jesus gives us a commandment. How do we let other people know that we're Christian? How do we respect? How do we honor? How can we communicate? How can we build trust in other people? When we first exhibit a love to them. Galatians chapter 4. Paul has just given a harsh word to the church in Galatia. They have been struggling. They have been turning back. They have been looking back to the law, and we have talked about that. We go back. We fall back into, we'll just say idolatry. We fall back into sin. We fall back into daily things that take our eyes off of God. We focus on other things apart from Him at times, and that's what these Galatians were doing. They had become these Judaizers. Remember, these Judaizers that said, we know more than you. We have more information than you. We're smarter than you. We have studied at the big universities or the big seminaries, and therefore we're more educated than you, and you have to have the law. You have to follow these rituals. You have to follow these ceremonies. And so these Galatians, they're confused. These new churches, we don't know what to do. So they have thought, since somebody has come in and taught me something different, and they seem to have authority in their teaching, they've taken that upon themselves. And that happens today as well. People present an item, or people present a viewpoint, and we say, well, they're from Harvard, they're from Yale. They must know. They graduated from an Ivy League. They have these initials before or after their name, so they must be smart. They must know more about this than me. So we fall into a trap sometimes. And that's what had happened to these churches in Galatia. They had been so impressed with some big words of these Judaizers that they had taken up the law again. They weren't required to live under the law, but it's so impressed upon them that we're going to do Christ plus this law so that we can be saved. So Paul has given a harsh word to the Galatians. He's talked to them. He's penned this letter to them. And now he's going to turn, and he's told them, he says, we don't live under the law, we live under grace. And he's taught them. And we just finished up identifying how we are adopted into the family of God, how we are adopted as children, as sons and daughters into His family, how God has entrusted us to that when we come to a saving grace, a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. So Paul has talked to these Galatians about grace, and now he's going to come and addressed grace between them and Christ, what Christ did for them, the grace that Christ poured. Now he's going to address, hey, since Christ has poured this grace out for you, you need to have grace in your relationships with others. You need to have grace for people in the church, for people outside of the church. He says he's going to say you need to have grace in the relationship that you have with a spouse, in the relationship maybe that you have with your children, or maybe your co-workers or the people at the beauty shop. Maybe you need to have a little grace. Maybe the children need to have a little grace for their parents. So Paul's going to turn to the church and he says, you know what? He says you need to have this grace, and you are wrecking your witness by the way you treat people. We do that as well. By the way we treat others, we wreck our witness. Relationships can be restored when we view them, when we look at them through God's grace. Verse 12 here, Galatians 4. I beg of you, brethren, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You have done me no wrong. So the first thing Paul says, he says, I beg of you, become as I am. What is Paul modeling? Paul says, keep trusting in Christ. Don't trust in you got your fingers crossed for your retirement that there's going to be enough pension, or there's going to be enough 401k, or there's going to be enough Social Security to get you through retirement. He says, quit crossing your fingers on the stock market and saying it's Jesus Christ plus the stock market that's going to lead you through retirement. He says, don't trust in that. He says, it's Jesus Christ alone. Quit trusting in Jesus Christ plus Blue Cross Blue Shield or Humana or anything like that. It's not Jesus plus another entity, another organization, or another belief system. It's Jesus Christ alone. So Paul says, keep trusting in Christ, not Christ plus something else. He says, and I want you to consider others. He says, I beg you, brethren, become as I am. I am trusting Christ. And I've also become as you. He says, so as I've become as you, I want you to consider others. He says, I have considered you. What Paul was saying, he says, when I first came into town, when I drove into town, when I rode into town, when I rolled up right here next door to you, when I set up shop, when I got to know you, he says, the first thing I did was build a relationship with you. He says, I wanted to get to know you. He says, I wanted to sit down beside you. I want to know where the good fishing spots were. He says, I want to know where the good hunting spots were. He says, if you were a NASCAR fan, he said, we sat down on Sunday afternoons and we watched NASCAR together. Or he said, I asked you what your favorite restaurant was. We went out and tried that out. He says, I came and asked you what your favorite sports team was. I asked you what you thought about the Cats' chances this afternoon. So you can quit looking at your watch because we'll get done in time today. Okay? I cut out a whole song just for you today so you can get home in time. Paul says, hey, I want to know what you thought about the team going into the tournament. He says, I asked questions about you. He says, as I sat down beside you, I asked about your family. I said, how are their kids doing? How's your family doing? How are the kids doing? Are they doing good in school, making good grades? Got their driver's license yet? How are the babies? He says, I asked you how your golf game was. You having fun? We went out and played a couple of rounds of golf. He says, I got to know you. You got to know me. Paul says, I wanted to know you in this capacity. I beg of you, brethren, become as I am, for I also have become as you. And you've done me no wrong. Paul says, I wanted to know. I had a sincere desire to know about you. He says, I wasn't just trying to build you up. He says, I wasn't just prepping you, or I wasn't just puffing you up so that I could get something from you. He says, I didn't butter you up so that I could ask for a job, or I didn't butter you up so that I could ask for a loan, or I could ask for a favor for no pay or something like that. He says, I had a sincere desire to know about you. See, Jesus Christ, He already knows about us, but He has a desire for us to have a relationship with Him so that we can know more about Him. But it's almost like we just want to go to Jesus for when we need help. So I'm just going to come to you. I've got things under control now, Jesus. But when I need some help again, then I'll be back at your door to knock. That's the way we treat Him. But Paul's looking at how we address other people. How do we treat others that we come into contact with? Paul says, when I came into town, I did not give demands. He says, when I came into town, when I first got to know you, when I came and set up church, he says, I didn't say, if you want to attend church today, you have to wear a suit and tie. Paul says, when I set up our church, I said, if you want to be a member, then you have to wear your hair this way. Paul says, I didn't do that. He didn't say, he said, if you want to be a part or participate in the functions of the church, he said, I didn't say you have to act like this or sit in the pew a certain way. He says, I listened to you and I got to know you. Getting to know somebody could quite possibly mean you listen more and you talk less. Getting to know somebody means that you hang out with them. Paul says, I had a desire to hang out with you so I could get to know you. And you've all heard it. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You've heard that forever, but it's the truth. Now, many of you, we did that spiritual gift test last week during the Sunday school time, and many of you came up and you said your gift, your spiritual gift, was the gift of faith. Well, do you know that faith is a relational gift? If you have the gift of faith, then you should be out getting to know some people and demonstrating that gift to others. To use that gift of faith, you have to be in relationships. You have to know other people. God did not give you a gift of faith so that you could sit inside all week and never be an example of His faithfulness. When you have the gift of faith, that means you are confident that God is going to respond in a certain way, that people can come to you, that you can pray with them, that you can model certain things with them, that you can encourage them, that you can uplift them. You can say, I truly expect God to display His power in this issue that you're having because I've seen Him do it in the past. God would not have given you that faith if He expected you to sit at home all week. See, when you have the gift of faith, as many of you said you have, you're going to be building up the church. You're going to be building up others. You're going to be displaying that confidence in God to who? Maybe a hurting neighbor, maybe a hurting coworker, maybe a friend, a relative. See, these people, the people that you associate with, they should be able to look to you because you have this gift and you have this confidence and you have this strength and this trust in God that He will move in a certain way. because of that gift, you're going to be modeling that to other people as well. So Paul came in. Paul says, hey, I beg of you. I'm pleading with you. I'm telling you. I want to know you on a close level. Not just like the person that you see every day at 8 or 9 o'clock on the road and you just wave to them with your hand on the steering wheel. He says, I want to know you more than just that casual flip of the hand. More than just that casual nod of the head there. See, we should get to know people as well. Paul says, he says, I didn't judge you. He says, I didn't judge you by the tattoos you have. I didn't judge you by the type of music that you listen to. I didn't judge you by your dress or by your race or by your color or your hair color or however you looked. I didn't judge you by your appearance. I wanted to get to know you. We should want to get to know people that way, because when we know people that way, we get to model grace to them. Because Christ has given you grace. The Scripture says we got filthy rags. So in appearance, if we're looking at ourselves spiritually pre-Christ, we're all going to be pretty dirty. Paul says, I did not associate with you because you didn't smell like me. You didn't wear the same cologne or perfume that I wore. You had a bad odor about you, so I didn't associate with you. Verse 13. People should know that we care about them, not because of their outwardly appearance, but because of what's on the inside. But you know that it was because of a bodily illness that I preached the gospel to you the first time. Now, some say Paul had maybe malaria, maybe he had migraines, maybe he had epilepsy, but whatever it was, people speculate on what it was. But verse 14 says, he says, and at that time, and that which was a trial to you in my bodily condition, you did not despise or loathe, but you received me as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus himself. He says, you treated me well. You didn't run from me. He says, I came to you and I had this bodily condition. What would his bodily condition have been? Paul could have had bloodshot eyes. He could have had a pink eye. He could have had this pus oozing out of his eye. But whatever it was, whatever the condition Paul had, if you were to have looked upon him, you would want to have grimaced and turned away. Or maybe even got out of the same room that he was in. It would have distracted you. It would have made your stomach queasy to look upon him. He says, you didn't do that. He says, as a matter of fact, look at what he says in verse 15. He says, you were so kind that you had even offered to give your eyes for me. He said, that's the relationship that you had with me. He says, you saw my condition and you felt sympathy for me because I had come, I had loved you, I had shown grace to you, I had shown compassion to you, I had cared for you, that you were interested in me, that I was interested in you, and you became so interested in me that you said, I wish I could take your condition for you. I wish I could help you out in this way, in this need. Because of our relationship with Christ, our relationship with others should be full of compassion and consideration. See, I've been telling you, just right now, Paul modeled, he says, I came and built a relationship with you. I came and built a foundation. I got to know you on a personal level. And when we get to know people on a personal level, that is when we get to speak truth into them and they can receive it. Paul says, I did not come and demand you change your dress. He says, I did not come and demand that you cease getting tattoos or that you have them removed. Paul says, I came to know you, and then that gave him the opportunity to speak truth into people's lives. Now, what happens? What happens when we don't exercise grace? Still in verse 15 and 16. See, when we don't exercise grace, we mark people off. We mark people off because their hair is different than ours. They got a funky color to it. They got a peekaboo strip in it or something, and it's just all, it makes us feel queasy or uneasy. Maybe you see peekaboo. You don't see peekaboo. I got a peekaboo back here. Y'all don't even know what peekaboo is. I guess it's saying it right. Bailey, am I right? Is it called a peekaboo? Strip where it's hidden back there? What's it called? You don't know. I just made it up, I guess. What are they teaching you in Western? Anything? Well, maybe it's best you don't know what peekaboo is. Anyway. See, we judge, or we have a predetermined idea about somebody. They have a streak in their hair, they have fluorescent color, their eyeshadow isn't what I like, their lipstick isn't what I like, they're not wearing a shirt that I approve of, or it's got the sleeves cut out of it, and that offends me, or whatever it is, and we write them off. We write them off, therefore we never build a relationship. We never get to know about them. We never know really what their character is. We never really know what their heart is, all because they have an earring or something hanging out of every orifice of their body. So we do that. They're not like me. And when we do that, it does not give us the opportunity to exercise grace. 15, where then is that sense of, I can't read either. Where then is that sense of blessing that you had? For I bear you witness that if possible, you would have plucked out your eyes and given them to me. So have I become your enemy by telling you the truth? He says, what you're doing now is you're blowing up social media. You're blowing up the news. You're getting on the phone and you're calling everybody. Say, hey, this guy here, you're just going all crazy. He says, I came and I made a relationship with you. He says, and now I've spoken truth to you, and it's ruffled your feathers. He says, remember, I didn't approach you in a demeaning way. He says, I approached you in a kind and considerate, a compassionate way. He says, now you have some others. Paul's going to say there are some others that are coming into your body, coming into your circle of friends, and they didn't have that pure intention that I did. So Paul's going to start to talk against them, those Judaizers, again in just a moment. He says, where then is that sense of blessing you had? When we do not exercise grace to others, it can sever our opportunity to witness to them. So Paul says, what happened to that excitement? He says, I came, I witnessed to you. As we witnessed together, there was this excitement about us. There was this joy about us. But now that you have turned from that, you have taken grace, you have removed the grace of Jesus Christ, that blessing on your life, you are now living outside of that, and it has robbed you of the joy of sharing. It's robbed you of the joy of giving. It has robbed you of the joy of being in relationships with others. He said, now I see you, or I hear about you, and you're rigid. You're just stiff, and you want everything your way. You've taken grace out of it. You're living outside of the grace of Christ, and you've lost that excitement of serving others. 17, they eagerly seek you. Now here's where he comes and talks about these Judaizers. Their intention. These people that have come in and tickled your ears, have told you false lies, they eagerly seek you. Eagerly and passionately. They've got this hunger to seek them out. Not commendably, but they wish to shut you out so that you will seek them. He says they don't care anything about you. They've come in, they did not build a relationship with you. They did not ask you about who won the race. this afternoon or last week or last night or whenever. They didn't ask you about your hobbies. They didn't ask you about your likes or your dislikes. They just came in and started telling you all of these lies, and their only intention was to get you on their side. He says they wanted to win you over to their side so that they would have some people to join with them. He says they didn't meet your family. They didn't ask you inquisitive questions about your children or get to know you in any aspect. Paul's saying, do not fall for people whose sole intent is flattery or the slickness of a tongue. He says, you beware of these people because they will mislead you and they will use you. We need to show others the grace of Christ. How can we do that? Christ has poured out grace upon you because you were not pretty. You were not all put together. You had an odor about you. You didn't walk on a fashion runway in New York or Paris or anywhere else. You were not some superstar or a model or the ideal person before Christ. So why do we expect an outside world, a dying world, to be any different than what we appeared as well? But yet Christ still poured out mercy and grace and forgiveness upon us. Can we not do the same thing to others? Paul's saying, I've done that. We've done that. We did that together. He says, but be careful of these people who are coming to mislead you and who are coming to say grace is irrelevant. See, I tell you about this not to excuse sin in a person's life, but to provide the opportunity. Not to excuse sin, but to provide the opportunity when you have gotten to know them, that then you can tell them about the forgiveness of Jesus Christ and the need for restoration in their life. We can share the gift of grace with others because we have received it. And we do not share it for personal gain or selfish desire. We can share it because He has shared it with us. There was a Confederate general in the Civil War who was in charge at the Battle of Antietam. It was in that battle where 23,000 troops died in one day. We think it's horrific to think of what goes on around the world right now with our troops serving. We think it horrific to think about what happened at 9/11 and the 3,000 or so plus that died nearly immediately right then. But 23,000 people died in the Battle of Antietam, the troops there. It was the battle was in a large field, cornfield it might have been, but in several large fields there. And the Confederacy was stationed upon a ridge. And the Union was trying to move its way up that ridge and over that ridge. And as they would come to that area, the Confederates were just pouring lead into them and just pushing them back. Until finally, as they moved across the terrain of those fields, finally they got to an area called the Sunken Road. You've probably heard of that, familiar with that. But the Confederacy was stationed in this area of the Sunken Road. And again, as the Union would try to press through, every time they would get to this area, the Confederacy would just unload their guns and just massacre the Union troops as they tried to move in. So finally the Union troops got together, realized what was going on, and said, let's get all of our manpower, harness it together, and we will make this one gigantic push and overrun the Confederates. And that's what they did. They harnessed all their manpower and they made this press, and as they stood over the Confederacy, they just poured bullets into the lines and annihilated them. There was this Confederate general who was in charge that I told you about. He was shot 5 times during that battle. He was shot twice in the leg, once in the hand, and once in the arm. As the battle continued, he took that 5th shot to his face. It went in one side of his face and out the other. They said that that last shot should have killed him. He fell over, and in his own pool, they said he should have drowned in his own pool of blood had it not been for a hole in his hat that allowed the blood to run out. He survived. This man survived, and he was actually part of the surrendering party at Appomattox. But it just so happened there was an officer under him who was very bitter with this general and the way he handled the battle. He despised him so much, and he wanted to humiliate him, he wanted to belittle him, that he brought him before a military court. He brought charges up against him. He accused him of being a coward, and he accused him of wrecking the battle. The general was sitting there at one time, and the officer screamed across the room at him and said, "You stand up and look at me." So the general stood up, turned, and faced the man. And as he faced the man that he had fought with, that man saw the massive scar on that general's face. He broke down in tears, repented, asked for forgiveness, and walked out. And people said as he walked out of that room, they could hear him saying, "I forgot the scars. I forgot the scar." We do not need to forget the scars that gave us grace. I ask you to bow your head. When you see other people, when you look upon them, do not forget the scar of Jesus Christ. From the beginning of time, it was already orchestrated that He was going to come and redeem humankind. But could He have easily said, they're not worth it. Let's just forget this. Let's just wipe them all out. We had a good relationship with us three before them. Let's just forget the whole thing. But He took our scars. He took our punishment. He took our debt, canceled it, nailed it to the cross, forgave us of that. Can we look past some faults in others so that we can have a relationship with them, not in excusing a sin, but with an opportunity to point them to a Savior who forgives? Paul says, I didn't write you off because Christ didn't write me off. Don't forget His scars. Don't forget the grace He gave you that you can give to somebody else. Oh, how He loves you. There's a prayer you have this morning.